Welcome to EPG Pathshala, Module 2. The importance of communication. As we all know, today communication is very essential and it has to be very effective. To make the communication effective, we need to know what are the ingredients that go with communication. Today, when we look at communication, it has grown far and wide. It has a lot of meaning, and the technology that we use in communication is enormous. And when we look at the prehistoric people and the present day people, there are a lot of things that we can find. It all started with inventing fire. And once they started inventing fire, then they started off with inventing the wheel. And with that, the technology have improved, and then the communication. Today, when we speak of communication, it is a bridge between people and places, and it gives a lot of importance in your workplace, in your family life, in your leadership role, whatever you are. Effective communication is something that is very essential. And in order to be effective in your communication, you have to rely on a lot of things, like your listening capacity, the way that you can express yourself, and the way that you can present yourself with your presentations. Those things that we need to look at. Now, let's come to certain things with regard to communication. An introduction to communication. Two-way process of reaching mutual understanding, in which participants not only exchange, encode, decode information, news, ideas, feelings, but also create and share meaning. In general, communication is a means of connecting people or places. In business, it is key function of management. An organization cannot operate without communication between levels, departments, and employees. We can now proceed to define communication from what we have seen above. To define means to give the precise and exact meaning of a word. The exact meaning of the word communicate is to share or to participate. The dictionaries say that communication is the transmission of a message or information by speaking or writing. Another dictionary declares that communication is giving or exchanging information, signals, messages by talk or gestures or writing. Yet another definition says that communication is social intercourse. Communication is all this and much more. A good definition should not only give the precise meaning, but also throw light on the scope of the word expression. Communication is giving, receiving, or exchanging ideas, information, signals, or messages through appropriate media, enabling individuals or groups to persuade, to seek information, to give information, or to express emotions. Origin of communication. Nobody knows exactly how many languages there are in the world because of the difficulty of distinguishing between a language and a sub-language, that is, dialects within it. One authoritative source that has collected data from all over the world listed the total number of languages as 6,809. The Bible's explanation of the origin of multiple human languages is provided in the Tower of Babel incident recorded in the book of Genesis. When Noah and his family stepped off the ark, They spoke a single language that was passed on to their offspring. As the population increased, it apparently remained localized in a single geographical region. Consequently, little or no linguistic variation caused. But when generation definitely rejected God's instruction to scatter over the planet, God miraculously intervened and initiated the major language groupings of the human race. This action forced the population to proceed with God's original intention to inhabit the earth by clustering according to shared languages. This depiction of the origin of languages coincides with the present status of the languages. The available linguistic evidence does not support the model postulated by evolutionary sources for the origin of languages. Many evolutionary linguists believe that all human languages have descended from a single primitive language, which itself evolved from the grunts and noises of lower animals. The single most influential hopeful monster theory of the evolution of human language was proposed by the famous linguist from MIT, Noam Chomsky, and has since been echoed by numerous linguists, philosophers, anthropologists, and psychologists. Chomsky argued that the innate ability of children to acquire the grammar necessary for a language can be explained only if one assumes that all grammars are variations of a single generic universal grammar, and that all human brains come with a built-in language organ that contains this language blueprint. If we stepped into time machine and travel back to a moment in history that gave us a glimpse of our ancestors, as they suggested, but somehow managed to communicate, we would be baffled yet marveled at how far we have come. We have upgraded our systems, changed our technological preferences, and convinced others in our lives to do the same, knowingly or unknowingly. The power of technology is a mammoth subject to review, but we have all seen it evolve and change over the years, making us appreciate the genius that man is. Back in the day, when man was busy carving and painting walls, he would have never imagined his world evolving to such levels of complexity in communication. It's amazing and a true marvel to see how communication methods have changed. Meaning of communication. Human beings communicate with each other through speech and gestures, whereas animals, birds, insects, and even plants communicate through sounds, sense organs, and movements. The word is derived from the Latin word communis, which means to make common, to transmit, to impart, or to share between two or more persons or groups. Communication is the natural aspect of man's life. Communication is as old as human. Human being himself starts communicating with birth. When a baby cries, it is communicating its need for attention or milk. When it gurgles, happy, it is expressing its sense of satisfaction. Man has always tried to share his thoughts, experiences, and feelings with others. We achieve our goals according to our ability to communicate effectively. Communication is the basis of all socio-economic, political, and cultural activities. There can be no society without communication. Definitions of communications. According to W.H. Newman and C.F. Zoomer, the definition of communication is the following. Communication is an exchange of facts, ideas, opinions, or emotions by two or more persons. According to Keith Davis, the definition of communication is the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. According to Peter Little, the definition of communication is it's a process information transmitted between individuals and organizations ensures an understanding response from the receiver of the communication. Concept of communication. Human beings cannot live in society without communication. Often, society punishes men and women who do not behave properly by excommunicating them. When a criminal is put in jail, the idea is to prevent him from communicating with the other members by imposing a sentence of excommunication on him. Communication is as old as man himself, and humans start communicating from birth. When a baby cries, it is communicating its need for attention. The monopoly of humans alone, a watchdog that growls at an intruder, or the alarm clock that wakes you up in the morning, both convey definite messages which are understood. Any transmission of a meaningful message which is understood is communication. The English word communication is derived from Latin term communis, which means to make common, to transmit, to impart. For the purpose of our study, all three meanings of the word are useful, but it is advisable to concentrate on the idea of making common. When something is made common, it implies sharing and interaction, and both of these are very important for communication in general. When message is sent out, it becomes communication. When it is understood, acknowledged, reacted to, or replied by the receiving party. If a radio message is beamed to Mars or to the moon, it does not become communication unless there is someone there to receive the message and understand it. Similarly, a person talking in Marathi to a person who only understands Tamil cannot be said to be communicating. When the Marathi speaking person, however, shakes hands with the Tamil knowing person, he can be said to be communicating. For shaking hands is universally recognized gesture of friendship. This brings us to another aspect of human communication, namely that communication need not be by words, spoken or written only, but can be by actions, body language, dress, gestures, secret codes, signals, facial expressions, and even by silence. The scope of communication. It is essential for the sender to understand the scope and for the recipient to understand the purpose of communication. If these understandings do not exist, then there is little chance of the communication being effective. Additionally, although the recipient who must understand the purpose, it is the responsibility of the communicator to ensure that the purpose is clearly identified. Scope in this context refers effectively to the sphere of operation or influence of the communication. There are two aspects of this: audience scope and subject scope. What is audience scope? First and foremost, it is essential for the communicator to clearly identify the target audience of the communication. This will allow the recipient to decide, is this communication intended for me? That means, when I talk about communication, I need to specify for which audience I am communicating to. It will also allow the communicator to tailor the communication to the particular needs of the audience. So, when we talk about the audience scope, it is merely the communication that is meant for a particular group. And let us come to the second scope of communication, that is subject scope. In order to allow readers to further ascertain whether the communication contains information that they need to know or that they may be looking for, a communication should always clearly identify the subject scope of the communication. The subject scope is a specification of the information covered by the communication. For example, if a document provides instructions for changing a printer cartridge, it would be wise to specify the model to which the instructions apply. Similarly, the subject scope talks about the particular aspect of the communication. So, if you are using your communication as the subject, naturally we need to say what we really want to say. In some circumstances, it may be more useful to specify the scope in terms of what is not covered by the communication. For example, in a general information manual for a network router, it may be worthwhile stating that the manual does not include information on installing or configuration a network, so that it will be very clear to the receiver of this communication. Nature of communication. Communication has been variously defined as the passing of information, the exchange of ideas, or the process of establishing a commonness or oneness of thought between a sender and a receiver. These definitions suggest that for communication to occur, there must be some common thinking between two parties, and information must be passed from one person to another. Language is one of the major barriers to effective communication, as there are different languages in different countries, different languages or dialects within a single country, and more subtle problems or linguistic and vernacular will be always there. The growth of bilingual, multicultural, ethnic markets in the United States is also creating challenges for domestic markets. Principles of communication. Principles of communication really talks about what are the essence of communication. What are the things that we really need to specify when we communicate. Communication must be clear so that the receiver can fully comprehend that the sender is trying to communicate. The sender's message must be tailored for the receiver. It must also be necessary to assume that the receiver has a certain level of intelligence and the receiver is able to follow the mechanics of communication. Top to bottom communication within the organization is based on the idea of trust. Trust is a must. We need to have the basic trust of the person to whom we are communicating and to the organization that we are communicating. And another important aspect is informal communication is usually more effective than formal communication. While formal communication seems more professional in an industrial setting, it has a lower compliance factor compared to an informal communication. This is because informal communication may involve a superior personally speaking to a subordinate face to face. Hence, compliance is much higher because the receiver can fully understand the sender. For example, a student is likely to pay more attention in a small informal classroom compared to a large formal lecture hall. The receiver is expected to stay attentive. Yeah, that's another factor that we need to concentrate on, that we need to be attentive whenever we communicate. When the message is being communicated, we need to be really attentive. Good attention is a very important factor in communication. It leads to better understanding of the message, hence a better outcome. Communication must be consistent with the overall plans of an organization. Yeah, it should be consistent and it should be continuous. In other words, communication must flow parallel to the policies, plans, programs, etc. of the organization. Inconsistent communication may lead to costly misunderstandings. And information must always be adequate and comprehensible. Incomplete information leads to loss of time and money and may develop misunderstandings, and this may harm the organization as a whole. So, information that must be always clear and to the point. Communication must be carried out on the proper time. Late communication may create late reactions from the receiver, causing the entire process to be set behind in time, and this may cause incoordination among organizational departments. It is always a good idea to receive feedback from the receiver in order to ensure clear communication. An effective communication network must be established within an organization. Importance of communication. There is more to communication than just talk and gesture. Listening, understanding, and interpreting are as much integral to communication as words, verbal, written, or gestured. Yes, even gestures in communication play a crucial role in conveying and interpreting the message. Similarly, how we communicate or express ourselves goes a great way towards determining how our expressions are interpreted. In most difficult part of running an organization is managing the human resources. This is one resource which doesn't work on any principle of management. So it is very important to have good communication level when we are working together, especially in a workplace. Importance of communication in leadership. If you are a leader, the leader has to have a very good command over the language and the things that he communicates to his subordinates. What is the role of a leader? A leader is expected to represent his or her followers and motivate them to reach heights of success through individual and collective effort. Communication is the best equipment a leader can employ to achieve this goal. Significance of communication in relationship. I don't think I need to elaborate much on this, as we all have some time or the other experienced certain roadblocks and voids in our relationships owing to a lack of communication. Lack of communication in relationships result in frustration, misunderstandings, unrealistic expectations, guilt, and can create personal differences. It is difficult for people who share their lives with each other to coexist for long without having regular and smooth communication for oiling the machinery of relationship. Relationship communication problems can only be solved through active and effective communication. So in order to have a healthy relationship, whether it be in family, whether it be in the friendship circle, whether it be with the parents and children, you need to have a healthy relationship communication. Need for communication. Yeah, today it is very essential to have communication among different stages of people. A human being starts communicating as soon as he starts producing his first noise in the act of drawing his parents' attention. When a baby is born, it cries. Why does it cry? Mainly to show the parents or to get the attention of the parents, and that's why the baby cries. Every emotion that we portray on our faces, the movement of our hands, the way we look at someone, or our speech instantly communicates our ideas to others. Communication is highly necessary for our society. Without communication, there cannot be any society. And communication is used for the transfer of ideas. To transfer ideas from one person to another, communication plays a vital role. Every human being has some ideas that are unique to his own mind. Many of these ideas can be implemented in real life and can turn into major creations too. But to make the transition from just a thought to an implementation, it requires effectual communication. Hence, the idea should be communicated as a plan, drawing or description so that it can be created further. And communication is used for interacting with society. It is very important that we interact with our surroundings and people living in the surroundings. Whenever we talk to someone, we know knowingly or unknowingly react to his or her questions, actions or comments. This is communication. While corresponding to someone in any way, we are actually communicating. Healthy communication is essential for a healthy society, and communication is meant for education. To educate someone, we need to communicate the ideas to the other person, especially with the syllabus or the study material to the student. It has to be explained to him. For that, we need to use communication. Education involves collection of all kinds of communications: audio communication, video communication, books and lectures. However, herein the deal is not just communicate, but to communicate effectively. Inefficient communication can lead to transfer of ambiguous knowledge, and we use communication to update ourselves. In the modern world, nothing is more important than staying up to date. Only through proper channel of communication can people be updated with current affairs and important events across the globe. Communication is the actual transfer of information through various mediums in such a way that it creates the need of people from one strata of life to another. And the communication is also used for entertainment. Entertainment today is mostly based on the channels of mass communication like films and television. Moreover, there and other arts also communicate certain ideas to the audience. Internet is another common platform for entertainment, which again is a mode of communication. In short, we can safely conclude that communication and entertainment are entwined in today's world, and we need a communication mainly to understand the world. Unless we communicate with the world, we will never understand the way things function and how things are piled up and related to one another. People are just fragment among these things. Did you know that other elements of the world also communicate to us, but in their own ways? We need to interact with the environment in order to understand life. So, communication to understand the world is very, very essential. And to sum up, communication is a bridge between people and places. When we are able to communicate well with people, then we are able to live happily. Without communication, there cannot be a society. A society devoid of communication is not a society. So, in today's world, what is important is communication, and it's not just communication, it is effective communication. In order to be effective in your communication, you have to be really good at it. You have to train yourself, you have to develop your capacities for becoming a good communicator. A good communicator is a good person, and he spreads fragrance and he spreads happiness all over. Thank you.